The fluorescent lights of the Walmart on Glenway Avenue felt like needles in my eyes. I stood at the register, my hands trembling as I fumbled with my worn leather wallet. Behind me, a young mother sighed, checking her watch. I didn't blame her. I was just another old man slowing down the world. "That'll be $42.18, sir," the cashier said. Her voice lacked any warmth, just the flat drone of someone who had said the same thing 1,000 times today. I slid my debit card through the machine. I knew my pension check had hit yesterday. I had calculated it down to the penny. The machine whirred, thought for a second, and then let out a sharp, mocking beep. Declined. My face burned. "Could you try it again, please? There must be a mistake." I tried again. Declined. I felt the heat of a dozen stares on my back. I looked down at the items on the belt: a bag of cheap dog food for Buster, a gallon of milk, and the heart medication Martha used to remind me to take every morning before she passed. I couldn't leave without the pills. My chest had been tight for 3 days. "Sir, do you have another way to pay?" the girl asked, her patience thinning. I opened my wallet, 3 singles and a handful of copper. I don't understand," I whispered. "I'd worked 40 years at the Cincinnati Millicron factory. I've never been a cent short on my bills." I had to leave the groceries there. Walking out of that store, empty-handed and followed by the whispers of "poor old guy," felt heavier than the steel beams I used to weld. When I got to my rusted Chevy, the cold Ohio wind bit through my thin VA jacket. I drove home to my small house in Price Hill, the one I'd paid off in 1994. But as I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something was wrong. The porch light didn't click on. I walked inside and flipped the switch. Nothing. The house was silent and freezing. I walked to the kitchen and saw the digital clock on the stove was dark. My stomach dropped. I went to the fridge and opened it. The light stayed off. I felt a sudden, sharp panic. I reached for the kitchen table to steady myself, but my hand hit a piece of paper instead. It was a bright orange notice taped to the back door. I squinted in the fading twilight to read the bold black letters at the top. It wasn't just a utility shut-off notice. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. My son, David, had the only other key. The paper wasn't from the electric company. It was a formal notice of sale, and the locks were scheduled to be changed in 48 hours. I sat in the dark for a long time, my coat still zipped to my chin. Buster, my old golden retriever, rested his heavy head on my knee. He was hungry, and I had failed him at the Walmart. The silence of the house was a physical weight, pressing the air out of my lungs. I remembered the day David was born. I'd held him in this very living room, promising him he'd always have a roof over his head. I never thought he'd be the one to take mine away. I reached for the rotary phone on the wall, one of the few things I refused to give up. But there was no dial tone. They'd cut that, too. I felt like I was being erased, one wire at a time. The next morning, I walked 3 miles to the Social Security office. My knees barked with every step, the damp January air settling into my old factory injuries. I waited for 4 hours on a hard plastic chair, surrounded by people who looked just as tired as I felt. When my number was finally called, I sat across from a woman whose name tag read Mrs. Gable. "My check," I said, my voice sounding raspy even to my own ears. "It didn't work at the store. I need to know why." Mrs. Gable clicked away at her keyboard, her eyes scanning a screen I couldn't see. She frowned, then looked at me with a flicker of pity that I hated more than her indifference. "Mr. Carter, your benefits were redirected 2 weeks ago to a joint account held by a David Carter." I felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "I didn't authorize that." "It says here a power of attorney was filed," she said, turning the monitor slightly. "Signed by you, witnessed, and notarized. Your address of record was also changed to a residential care facility in Mason. My hands were shaking so hard I had to sit on them. I've never been to Mason. I live in the house I built. She sighed, a sound of bureaucratic defeat. You'll need to file a fraud report, but that takes months, sir. As of right now, David Carter is the legal conservator of your estate. I walked out of that building feeling like a ghost. I was a Vietnam veteran. I survived the jungles and the hard years of the recession, but I didn't know how to survive my own blood. I needed to get to the bank, but the street was a blur of traffic and my head was spinning. I stood at the corner of 4th and Main, the wind whipping my hair, feeling utterly invisible. I stepped off the curb, my eyes clouded with tears of frustration, and didn't see the black SUV hurtling towards me. A firm hand gripped my shoulder and yanked me backward just as the SUV roared past, the wind from its wake nearly knocking me over. I stumbled, my heart leaping into my throat. "Whoa there, sir. Easy does it," a young voice said. I looked up, blinking. A young man, maybe 25, stood there. He was wearing a simple hoodie and jeans, but he had eyes that seemed to see right through my pride. He didn't let go of my arm until he was sure I was steady. "I'm all right," I snapped, the old-school dignity kicking in. I didn't want a handout, and I didn't want pity. Just lost my footing. "It's a treacherous corner," the young man said kindly. He didn't look away or walk off like everyone else. "I'm Marcus. You look like you've had a hell of a morning, Mr. Carter." "Raymond Carter," I said, straightening my jacket. "And I'm fine, Marcus. I just have things to attend to." "Well, Mr. Carter, I'm headed across the street anyway. Mind if I walk with you? It's safer in pairs." He didn't wait for an answer. He just matched my slow, shuffling pace. As we crossed, I found myself doing something I never do. I started talking. Maybe it was the near-death experience, or maybe it was just that he was the first person in a week who looked at me like a human being instead of a nuisance. "My son took my money," I blurted out as we reached the other side. I immediately felt foolish. Why was I telling a stranger my shame? Marcus stopped. He didn't look shocked. He looked angry, but not at me. He did what? "I used some legal paper. Power of attorney, they called it. He's selling my house. My wife's house." I looked at my boots. "I'm 79 years old, and I don't have enough money for a gallon of milk." Marcus went quiet for a moment. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook. "Where do you live, Raymond?" I gave him the address, wondering why it mattered. He scribbled it down and then reached into his wallet, pulling out a $20 bill. He tried to press it into my hand. "No," I said, pulling back. "I don't take charity." "It's not charity," Marcus said firmly. "It's a loan from one Cincinnatian to another. You get your groceries. I'll meet you at your house at 5 o'clock. I might have a way to help." I watched him walk away, feeling a strange spark of hope I hadn't felt since Martha died. But as I turned toward the bank, I saw a familiar car parked out front. It was David's new Mercedes, the one he'd bought right after I signed those insurance papers last month. I walked into the bank, my heart heavy as lead. I saw David sitting at a glass-walled desk with a woman in a sharp suit. He was laughing, that easy, charming laugh he used when he wanted something. He stood up and hurried towards me, grabbing my elbow and steering me toward the door. "Dad, what are you doing here? You should be at home resting." "The lights are off, David," my voice trembling. "The heat is gone. And the lady at the Social Security office says you took my check. Why?" David sighed, that condescending sound he'd perfected. "Dad, we talked about this. You're getting forgetful. You left the stove on twice last month. We're just moving things along to get you into a place where people can look after you. It's for your own safety." "I never left the stove on," I said, my voice rising. People were starting to look. "You're stealing from me, son. That's my life's work in those accounts." "It's our family's future, Dad," David hissed, his voice dropping to a low, cold whisper. "The house is worth a fortune now with the new development coming in. You're 79. What do you need a 4-bedroom house for? You're going to the Mason Meadows on Friday. I've already signed the papers." "I'm not going anywhere," I said, trying to pull my arm away. "You don't have a choice," he said,
and the look in his eyes was something I'd never seen before. It wasn't love, it was greed. The power of attorney is ironclad. You signed it. Now go home. I'll have some food delivered to the porch, but don't come back here. You're making a scene. He signaled to the bank's security guard. My father is a bit confused. Could you help him to his car? The guard, a man half my age with a badge that looked too shiny, placed a hand on my shoulder. Come on, sir, let's go. I was escorted out of the bank like a criminal. I stood on the sidewalk, the cold air hitting my face, feeling the last of my dignity shatter. My own son had called me confused to a stranger just to keep his hands on my money. I drove home in a daze, the gaslight on my dashboard flickering like a warning. When I got home, I found Buster waiting by the door. I gave him the last of the bread, soaked in water to make it feel like a meal. I sat in Martha's old rocking chair, staring at the wall. The sun began to set, and the house grew even colder. Just as I was about to give up and lie down in the dark, there was a sharp knock at the door.
I opened the door to find Marcus standing there. He wasn't alone. Beside him was an older man, maybe 60, carrying a briefcase. They both looked frozen, their breath blooming in the air like white smoke. "Raymond," Marcus said, stepping inside without being asked. "This is Mr. Henderson. He's a retired lawyer who specializes in elder law. He's also an old friend of my family." I looked at them, confused. "I told you I can't pay for a lawyer. My son has everything." Mr. Henderson stepped forward and shook my hand. His grip was firm. "Marcus told me what's happening, Mr. Carter. I don't want your money. I want to see justice. I spent 30 years fighting people who prey on the vulnerable. Let's see those papers you mentioned." I led them to the kitchen, lighting a few candles I'd found in a drawer. By the flickering light, I showed them the notice I'd taken off the door. Henderson looked it over, his brow furrowing. "This isn't just a sale notice. This is an expedited foreclosure. It looks like your son took out a private bridge loan against the house and defaulted on purpose to trigger a quick sale to a shell company." "Why would he do that?" I asked, my heart sinking. "Because a regular sale takes time and inspections. A foreclosure sale to a pre-arranged buyer is a way to wash the title and get the cash instantly. He's liquidating your life, Raymond." "Can we stop it?" I asked. Henderson looked at Marcus, then back at me. "The power of attorney is the key. If we can prove you weren't of sound mind when you signed it, or better yet, that he misrepresented what the document was, we can freeze everything. But we need a judge to see you tonight, or by Friday, you'll be on a bus to Mason Meadows." Suddenly, the front door flew open. David stood there, his face contorted in rage. Behind him was a woman I recognized, his wife, Sarah. She was clutching her expensive leather purse like it was a shield. "Who are these people, Dad?" David shouted, stepping into the kitchen. "I told you to stay put. You're trespassing on private property. This house belongs to the trust now." Marcus stood up, his height surprising me. He stepped between me and my son. "The trust hasn't been finalized, David, and we were just discussing the legality of that signature." David sneered. "Get out of here before I call the cops. My father is senile. He doesn't know what he's doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," I said, my voice finally finding its strength. David laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Oh yeah? Then you'll remember the hospital papers you signed after your dizzy spell, the ones that gave me full medical and financial control." He held up a folder. "It's over, Dad. The movers are coming tomorrow at 8 a.m. You're leaving this house whether you like it or not." David and Sarah stormed out, the door slamming so hard the glass rattled in the frame. The silence that followed was even heavier than before. I sank back into my chair, the candlelight casting long, dancing shadows on the walls where pictures of David's childhood used to hang. I'd taken them down months ago, unable to look at the boy he used to be. "He's going to do it," I whispered. "He's really going to put me out." "Not if we can help it," Marcus said, kneeling beside me. "Mr. Henderson, what's the move?" Henderson was already on his cell phone. "I'm calling a colleague who's a magistrate. If we can get an emergency stay based on elder abuse, we can block the movers.
but we need a statement from Raymond's doctor. My doctor is at the VA, I said. Dr. Eris. He's known me for 20 years. He knows I'm not senile. It's late, Marcus said, checking his watch, but the VA clinic has an overnight urgent care. If we can get Eris on the phone or find a duty nurse who can access your records, we might have a shot. We piled into Marcus's car. The heater worked, and for the first time in 2 days, my bones began to thaw. We drove through the quiet streets of Cincinnati, past the closed shops and the glowing yellow arches of McDonald's. I thought about the thousands of hours I'd worked, the sweat I left on the factory floor, all to build a life that was being dismantled by the person I loved most. At the VA hospital, the waiting room was dim. A few veterans sat in the corners, staring at a TV that was muted. I felt a kinship with them, the forgotten men. Marcus stayed with me while Henderson went to find a contact. "Why are you doing this, Marcus?" I asked quietly. "You don't know me. I'm just an old man you met on a street corner." Marcus looked at me, and a strange expression crossed his face, half sadness, half resolve. "My grandfather was a vet, Raymond. He died in a place like Mason Meadows because no one stood up for him. I promised myself I'd never let that happen again if I could stop it." Before I could respond, Henderson came back, his face grim. "Bad news. Dr. Eris is on vacation, and according to the digital file, a David Carter called this afternoon to freeze your records, claiming a change in guardianship. They won't release a statement without a court order." My heart felt like it was being squeezed by a cold hand. The tightness in my chest returned, sharper this time. I gasped, clutching my coat. "Raymond?" Marcus grabbed my arm. "Raymond, talk to me." Everything started to go gray at the edges. The last thing I saw was the fluorescent lights of the VA ceiling before the world went black. I woke up to the steady beep, beep, beep of a heart monitor. The smell of antiseptic and floor wax was unmistakable. I was in a hospital bed, an IV line tugging at the back of my hand. The light coming through the window was pale and gray. Morning had arrived. "He's awake," a voice said. I turned my head. Marcus was sitting in a vinyl chair by the bed. He looked like he hadn't slept a wink. Henderson was standing by the window, talking quietly on his phone. "What happened?" I asked, my voice a thin whistle. "Mild cardiac event," Marcus said. "Stress. The doctors have you stabilized, but they want to keep you for observation." "The house," I said, struggling to sit up. "The movers. David said 8 a.m. Henderson hung up his phone and walked over. "It's 8:30 now, Raymond. I filed the emergency injunction, but the judge hasn't signed it yet. Without that signature, we can't legally stop them from entering the property." I felt a sob rise in my throat, but I choked it back. I wouldn't cry. Not yet. "Everything I have left is in that house. Martha's wedding dress, my father's medals from World War II. Buster is still there." "The dog is fine," Marcus reassured me. "I went back and got him. He's at my apartment. But Raymond, there's something else. While you were out, I did some digging into that shell company Henderson mentioned." Marcus pulled a laptop onto his lap and showed me a screen full of legal jargon. "The company buying your house is called Apex Holdings. Do you know who owns the majority stake in Apex?" I shook my head. "It's David's wife's brother," Marcus said, his voice tight with anger. "They aren't just selling the house to pay off a debt. They're selling it to themselves for a fraction of its value, so they can flip it for a $500,000 profit when the new park opens next year. They're stealing your equity, Raymond. All of it." I stared at the screen. It wasn't just greed, it was a conspiracy. My son wasn't just trying to protect me, he was treating me like a carcass to be picked clean. Just then, the door to the room swung open. A nurse walked in, followed by 2 men in suits I didn't recognize. "Mr. Carter," one of the men said, "I'm with the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office. We have a report from your legal guardian that you've been abducted from your home by unauthorized individuals." He looked at Marcus and Henderson. "I'm going to have to ask you two to step outside, now." "He's a patient," Marcus shouted. "He's a ward of the state under his son's care, and his son wants him moved to Mason Meadows immediately." They wouldn't let Marcus stay. The officers escorted him and Henderson out of the room, leaving me alone with a nurse who wouldn't look me in the eye. She started packing a small plastic bag with the few things I had arrived with. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter," she whispered. "The paperwork is all in order. Your son is waiting downstairs with a transport van." "I fought for this country. I worked 40 years. I paid my taxes. How can this happen?" She didn't answer. She just helped me into a wheelchair. When they rolled me out to the curb, David was there. He wasn't wearing a suit today. He was in a tracksuit, looking like he was headed to the gym after he finished disposing of his father. A white van with Mason Meadows painted on the side was idling, exhaust billowing in the cold air. "Ready to go, Dad?" David said, his voice falsely bright. "It's a beautiful facility. You'll have a TV and 3 meals a day. It's better than that drafty old house." I looked at him. "I know about Apex Holdings, David. I know about Sarah's brother." David's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then hardened into something cruel. "Doesn't matter what you know. You're a confused old man with a heart condition. No one is going to listen to you. Now get in the van." He reached out to grab my wheelchair, but a car screeched to a halt behind the van. It was Marcus's beat-up sedan. He jumped out, followed by Henderson and a woman in a black robe who looked like she meant business. "Stop!" Henderson yelled. "Service of process." He handed a folder to the sheriff deputy who was still standing by. The deputy opened it, his eyebrows shooting up. "What is this?" David demanded, stepping forward. "Get these people away from my father." "This is a temporary restraining order and a suspension of your power of attorney," Henderson said, his voice booming. "Signed by Judge Miller here. We've presented evidence of self-dealing and fraud regarding the sale of the property to Apex." David's face went white. That's a lie. It's a legal sale." "The judge will decide that, but for now, Raymond is going home. And David, you're barred from coming within 500 feet of him or the property." I felt a surge of triumph, but it was short-lived. David looked at me. A sneer curled his lip. "Fine, go back to your empty house, old man, but you might want to see what the movers did before we got served the papers. I told them to work fast." He climbed into his Mercedes and peeled away. My heart sank. Marcus rushed to my side. "Raymond, we got it. You're free." "Take me home," I said, a sense of dread pooling in my stomach. "Take me home now."
We pulled up to my house 20 minutes later. My heart broke before I even got out of the car. The front lawn was littered with trash. A pile of old clothes, my clothes, was heaped near the curb like a mountain of rags. I saw Martha's favorite floor lamp lying snapped in half on the sidewalk. The front door was wide open, swinging aimlessly in the wind. I pushed myself out of the car, ignoring Marcus's hand. I walked into the house. It was gutted. David had instructed the movers to take everything of value. The antique hutch that had been in Martha's family for 3 generations was gone. The TV was gone. Even the pictures on the walls had been ripped down, leaving pale rectangles on the wallpaper like scars. I walked into the bedroom. My dresser was overturned, my medals gone, my letters from the war scattered and trampled by muddy boots. "They took everything," I whispered, sinking onto the edge of the stripped mattress. "Every memory, every bit of proof that I lived here." Marcus stood in the doorway, looking around at the wreckage. "We'll get it back, Raymond. We'll sue him for every cent. We'll file criminal charges for the theft." "It's not about the money," I said, picking up a torn photo of Martha. "He took my life. He looked at 40 years of marriage and 40 years of work and saw nothing but a paycheck. My own son." I felt a tear finally roll down my cheek. It felt hot and heavy. I didn't wipe it away. "Raymond, Marcus said softly, sitting on the floor near my feet. I need to tell you something. I told you my grandfather died in a home. That was true, but I didn't tell you his name. I looked at him, confused. His name was Silas Thorne. The name hit me like a physical blow. I searched my memory back to the humid green hell of the Central Highlands in '68. Silas? The medic from the 101st? Marcus nodded, his eyes shimmering. He talked about you until the day he died. He told me how a young corporal named Ray Carter carried him 3 miles through a firefight with a shattered leg. He said you were the bravest man he ever knew. He told me if I ever saw that name, I should do whatever I could to help. I stared at him. The young man who helped me cross the street wasn't a stranger. He was the legacy of a man I'd saved a lifetime ago. I didn't just happen to be on that corner, Raymond, Marcus said. I've been looking for you for months. My grandfather left me a little money, and he asked me to find you, to make sure you were okay. Suddenly, Henderson walked in holding a manila envelope he'd found in the mailbox. Raymond, you need to see this. It was delivered by a courier this morning. It's from the bank's corporate legal department. I took the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a legal document and a personal check. It's from the bank's corporate legal department, Henderson explained, reading over my shoulder. It seems they did an internal audit after our inquiry yesterday. They realized the power of attorney David used had a forged witness signature, Sarah's sister. They've frozen all of David's assets and reversed the transfers. This check, it's your full balance, plus a settlement for the clerical error that allowed the fraud. I looked at the number on the check. It was more than I'd ever had in my life. It was enough to buy back every piece of furniture, to fix the house, and to live comfortably for the rest of my days. But then I looked at the second paper. It was a copy of a police report. The sheriff's office picked up David and Sarah 10 minutes ago. Grand larceny, elder abuse, and identity theft. Because they crossed state lines with some of the assets, it's going to be federal. They're facing years, Raymond. I sat in the middle of my empty, ruined house. I had my money back. I had my home back, but I had lost my son. Do you want to see them before they're processed? I thought about the boy I'd taught to ride a bike. I thought about the man who'd tried to put me in a cage for a profit. I stood up, my old school dignity returning, but tempered with a new kind of peace. No, I said firmly. I have everything I need right here. Marcus whistled, and Buster came bounding into the room, tail wagging so hard his whole body shook. He licked my hand, his tongue warm and real. We spent the next week rebuilding. Marcus stayed every day. We didn't buy new furniture. We tracked down the old pieces from the warehouse where the movers had taken them. We hung the pictures back up. We fixed the lamp. A young man helped me cross the street, and it did save my life. Not just from a car, but from the darkness of being forgotten. I'm 79 years old, and for the first time in a long time, I'm not just waiting for the end. I'm home.